Now, when we want to retopologize or actually create polished surfaces in ZBrush, there are a few different methods. So obviously you could always like create manual topology in Blender or Maya. However, in ZBrush itself, there are a few methods. So a very popular one would be to use the topology brush to actually draw like manual topology. Personally, I don't like to use that method, simply because if I'm doing it manually in ZBrush, I could also just extrude planes in Maya or Blender. So apart from that, the other very popular method would be to ZRemesh with polygroups. So in ZBrush, you have like different polygroups, and we can tell our ZRemesher to respect the surfaces of those polygroups. So there are a few different methods in order to create polygroups. So if you hit Shift and F on your keyboard, you can switch like the view or hit this button right here. So the most common method would be to mask and then hit Control and W in order to create a polygroup. This works fine, or this I think would even work fine for like less complex shapes like this one. However, as soon as we get to like very refined and complex shapes, like this back piece right here, or this armor plate, those methods would be very time consuming, like masking and hitting Control W. So another method that I personally like to use would be to create polygroups from paint. So that is very straightforward. So we can go for color and then fill object. So by default, white would be selected. So this entire object is now filled with white. So now if we hit V, we can switch our colors, and then we can select the paintbrush in order to draw with black paint. So that would be B, P, and then A. So before we start to paint our edges, we actually have to consider a few things. So first of all, this algorithm, like the PolyGroupIt plugin, works with contrast. So it purely works with like, or it works best with black and white paint. So this entire object right now is filled with white. So we want to paint black on top, and we want to make sure we are painting with pitch black. So firstly, we're going to brush, tablet pressure, RGB intensity, and we crank this one up to 100%. So now if we paint, we are painting in black. However, we still might run into a few issues. So another thing we're going to do is decrease the focal shift to -100, and now we are actually drawing pitch black. Also make sure to turn off your alpha, and make sure that you got some sort of resolution. So this works best if you have no subdivision levels, so either a high sub-D mesh, or in this case a dynameshed high-res model. Keep in mind we will create a low poly model through this entire process, so that's no problem. And then we can start to simply paint our hard edges. So now, once those lines are in place, we can go to Z plugin, PolyGroupIt, and then hit polygroup from paint. And now, as you can see, we've got perfect polygroups, which we can now use with our ZRemesher. So firstly, I'm going to get rid of those lines. Once again, filling our object entirely with white color. And now I can decrease the polygon count to half its size, hit keep groups, and now I can ZRemesh once or even twice. I can ZRemesh once more. A setting that is fairly useful would be polish right here, or even like polish by groups. However, polish by groups tends to create those very hard edges, which we do not need right now because we will create them manually. So we can now decrease our entire resolution once more, I think. So let's see. This works well. We can actually keep the polygon count itself, but we can play with the adaptive size, which doesn't always work well, but it's worth giving it a shot. So all those steps are trial and error. So play with like the deformation sliders, play with like the Z-remeshing settings, and try to find a result that works best for you. So personally, I think so if those next few resolution decreasing steps aren't giving you the results you're looking for, we can try to crease our polygroups. So we could, for example, crease polygroups right here. So as you can see, there are two supporting edge loops to each side of the polygroups. So we could, for example, bevel those. However, we do not have to do that right now because those creasing lines will keep in place. But now in our ZRemesher, we can hit keep creases. So as you can see, if we decrease the resolution, we can now get those hard edges. Another thing we can do is using H-polish in those low resolution states in order to manually polish our areas. So as you can see, we could bevel our creases. However, this isn't what I'm looking for right now. So I'm now going to delete those creases, so uncrease all. And now if we use subdivision, you can see that we now have a somewhat clean surface, which we are then able to manually polish, or once again play with our deformation slider to polish, or polish by groups. So all those methods combined can create very clean results. So as you can see right here, we get from here to here within like a few steps. So I'm not liking those very hard edges, so I'm keeping this result right here. And now once we have a somewhat clean mesh, we can still go ahead and create further detail with IMM brushes or booleans, or even alpha textures, or just like creasing. For example, orb crack brushes right here, which we can then use on a high subdivision level in order to create panel lines. Now, lastly, I think it is important to mention that there is no such thing as good or bad topology. It is mostly about its purpose. So when you're trying to create a model for animation, you obviously want to mostly create manual retopology in order to have edge loops at, for example, knees or arms, to enable the bendability, if you can call it like that. For concepting, you might even be fine with like a very high Dynamesh model. However, this, in my opinion, is a very quick method to get a somewhat decent result in a very quick time, and without like switching software and exporting to Maya or Blender. And obviously, once you have those polygroups in place, we can simply adjust and reiterate those groups. We could still mask and create new groups in order to reshape and polish. So if you got any questions, don't hesitate to leave them down below. I'll try to answer. Also, let me know if I missed any steps. So especially in ZBrush, there are just so many tools. Like, I don't think I'll ever know any tool there is. And there are so many different approaches to polishing. And if I missed some important part, please let me know. And have a great day.